If you change, your life changes. And nothing changes in our life until we change. So now when you feel abundant, when you feel successful, you feel unlimited, you feel whole, the experience is teaching the body chemically to understand what the mind is intellectually understood.
Why is it so hard to make genuine change happen in our lives? People want to change.
Yeah, I think the biggest difficulty in change is making a different choice. So 95% of who we are by the middle of our life is an unconscious set of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that are automatically programmed into our biology. Well, I think we've been programmed quite a bit with our relationship with money. And we have a relationship with everything known in our environment. You have a relationship, a neurological network in your brain for your parents, for your cell phone, for your computer, where you live, where you've lived in the past, what you're going to do tomorrow.
How do you describe what you do?
I think we teach people the neuroscience and the biology of change. And the principle is just really simple. If you change, your life changes. And nothing changes in our life until we change. So one of the things that people come up against is why is it so hard to change? So we've kind of come down through a lot of research, a simple formula to help people to make transformations first in themselves and then their lives. And so we give people knowledge and information, and we use science as that language that to meet information, and we combine quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and electromagnetism, and help people understand information that's philosophical, that's theoretical. And when you learn information, you make new connections in your brain. That's what learning is. But if you don't review it and if you don't repeat it, you don't think about it, those circuits prune apart within hours or days. So we run these courses, these events that are typically 7 days, where it's fully immersing yourself in this process of transformation. Give people the information. It's philosophical, it's theoretical. Have them understand it. They have to be present with it. But now turn to someone and teach it back to them, what you've learned, nerve cells that fire together, wire together. So then in time, you begin to install the neurological hardware in your brain in preparation for the experience. And the more you understand what you're doing, and the more you understand why you're doing it, the how gets easier, because you can assign meaning to the task and get a greater outcome. If you can't explain it, it's not wired in your brain, right? So it's so much easier to forget the information than to remember it. And it just takes repetition and attention to get the circuitry in place. And once you understand the what and the why, we set up the conditions in the environment to give people the proper instruction. And when you apply it, when you personalize it, when you demonstrate it, when you initiate that knowledge, and you get your behaviors to match your intentions, and you get your actions equal to your thoughts, you get your mind and body working together, you have an experience. Now, experience really enriches circuitry in the brain. And when those neurons organize into networks even further, the brain makes a chemical, and that's called a feeling or an emotion. So now when you feel abundant, when you feel successful, you feel unlimited, you feel whole, the experience is teaching the body chemically to understand what the mind is intellectually understood. So now the information is not in the brain anymore. The information is now in the body. And the person is embodying the truth of that philosophy, right? And somehow there's biological changes that take place as a result of it. The question is, okay, if you've done it once, you should be able to repeat the experience. And so if people go through a 7-day immersion and they keep repeating the experience, they begin to neurochemically condition their mind and body to begin to work together. And when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your conscious mind, now it's innate in you. You've become the knowledge. It's a subconscious program. It's who you are. So we teach people to go from that kind of philosophical, theoretical knowledge to the application, to initiate it, to ultimately get wise about why they're doing it. And so we study the neuroscience and biology, and we work with University of California, San Diego, and we publish papers, and we do extensive research really to demystify the process.
Why is it so hard to make genuine change happen in our lives? People want to change. They want to do different things. Why is it so hard?
I think the biggest difficulty in change is making a different choice. Now think about the New Year's resolutions. Everybody's very clear about what their intention is, what they want, whatever that is. But if you keep making the same choices, you're going to keep doing the same things. You're going to keep creating the same experiences. You're going to keep feeling the same emotions. And your biology and your neurocircuitry and your chemistry and your hormones and even your gene expression is going to stay the same because you're the same. But keep thinking the same way, keep acting the same way, keep feeling the same way, and do it over and over again. Those circuits in the brain ultimately become hardwired. And the emotions that are a response to someone or something, even your own thoughts, get conditioned subconsciously as a program into the body. So 95% of who we are by the middle of our life is an unconscious set of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that are automatically programmed into our biology. So the first step to change is not thinking positively. You got to become conscious of those unconscious thoughts when you decide to make a different choice and it doesn't feel familiar. The thought that says, start tomorrow, it's too hard, just do it anyway, go ahead and make that choice, do the same thing. You're not good enough, you'll never change, you're too much like your parents, I failed last time. You have to be able to become so conscious of those unconscious thoughts that you would never go unconscious to that thought ever again, and that's change. You'd have to catch yourself, how you speak and how you act. If you want to be happy and you're blaming and you're complaining and you're feeling sorry for yourself and you're judging everyone, those behaviors are not going to make you happy. They're actually going to make you unhappy. So you got to become so conscious of those unconscious habituations that you wouldn't go unconscious and behave that way. And then, of course, you got to look at those emotions that are pretty much chemical residue from the past, and decide, does this lack, does this suffering, does this pain belong in my future? And that process of becoming so conscious that we don't go unconscious is the process of change. And how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's the moment of change. So the hard part about change is when you decide to make a different choice, get ready. It's going to feel uncomfortable. There's going to be uncertainty. You're not going to be able to predict the next moment. It's going to feel unfamiliar. So if the body has been conditioned to be the mind, then the servant is the master. So the body starts sending information back to the brain to think a certain thought so that you make the same choice, that you do the same thing, you create the same experience.
Comfortable, this is familiar.
Get back to the same feeling of suffering. That feels so much better than the uncertainty of the unknown. So going from the old self to the new self and crossing that river literally is a neurological, it's a biological, it's a chemical, it's a hormonal, it's a genetic death of the old self. That's the phoenix lighting itself on fire. And most people would rather cling to that familiar place than take a chance and possibility. That void, that vacuum actually is the perfect place to create it. And we discovered this, that the brain changes the most when you get to that point where you think you can't go any further and you want to quit. If you go past that point, that is the unknown. Now, the unknown has always been wired in our biology, that the uncertainty of the unknown is always a scary place. Is that a tiger in the bushes, or is that just a shadow? So the unknown becomes a very scary place when we're living in survival. So most people never take that chance and possibility. But if a person's actually taught how to execute in the unknown and there's nothing scary there, and they can apply the same principle and say, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again. So what is the voice in my head that I want to program my brain into thinking and believing? What behaviors am I going to demonstrate in my life if I'm going to not behave this way around this person or around this circumstance and I want to behave a different way? Let me rehearse in my mind, close my eyes, and get really clear on how I'm going to respond or behave in this circumstance. And the act of mental rehearsal literally grows circuits in the brain. Now your brain's looking like you've already done it. Your brain is no longer a record of the past. It's being conditioned and mapped into the future. So now you have the circuitry in place. So if you keep practicing that, the hardware becomes more automatic. It becomes more of a software program, and you start behaving that way. And then the biggest challenge then is, okay, if I'm not going to feel suffering, and I'm not going to feel pain, and I'm not going to feel judgment, but I want to feel grateful for my life, can I teach my body emotionally what my future will feel like before it happens. So once you start conditioning your body to an elevated emotion, and we tend to see that the heart-centered emotions tend to be the ones that produce the most dramatic changes in our biology. And the body's so objective, it really doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. Then the body starts getting lifted in a lot of ways. So keep thinking differently, keep acting differently, keep feeling differently. That's your personality. Then your personal reality begins to change. And with people who cross that river, there's new opportunities, there's new experiences, there's new events that take place in their life. So that's what we teach.
What is blocking us from manifesting love?
I really think that the majority of people spend most of their time in a state of readiness in their life. They're always ready for whatever's going to take place. And it's like an idol. So the hormones that are associated with getting up and going and reacting stressfully, those hormones are hormones that create a primitive mechanism where we go into survival, right? And living in stress and living in survival is not a time for us to open our hearts, right? So get bruised, get damaged, get injured in your life. The stronger the emotion you feel towards that event in your life, the more altered you feel from that experience. The brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. So people think about the problems that happened in the past, and they produce the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was happening. So what happens is the body gets conditioned emotionally into the past. So now the trauma or the betrayal is not just in the brain now, it's in the body. So the body, in a sense, gets programmed or conditioned to stay in survival. And when you're in survival, it's not a time to be vulnerable. It's not a time to open our hearts. It's not a time to create. It's in a state of arousal where we have to keep our attention on things that matter, the things in our environment, the way our body is feeling and how we're managing ourselves, and time in and of itself. So to change is to be greater than your body, to be greater than your environment, and to be greater than time. And so when we're stressed, it's really hard to change. When we're stressed, it's really not a time to change, it's not a time to create, and it's not a time to learn. So then this is a mechanism that's primitive in our biology. And to be able to tame the animal so that the animal self, so it's no longer in a state of readiness, trying to always predict the worst case scenario, just so you could be ready if it happens. It turns out that that's the conversion of those survival states into a state of creation. We've discovered some really important things about it. And if you teach people how to convert from that sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, if you teach them how to trade resentment and impatience and frustration, justified or not, that's doing no good for you, for an elevated emotion, and actually practice making the chemistry that is associated with love. And in the beginning, it's difficult. And so if you place your attention on your heart, we discovered that there's a very low frequency that you can measure that actually goes up, that's indigenous to what the heart needs in terms of a life force to beat. So where you place your attention is where you place your energy, and all the things you can place your attention on, place it on your heart. Now, slow your breathing down, and if you can slow your breathing down, you can take your body out of that state of readiness. And when you slow your breathing down, you slow your brain waves down, and your body starts to move out of that state of sympathetic arousal. Practice feeling elevated emotions with your heart: kindness, care, love, appreciation, gratitude, and you'll get good at feeling that way if you keep doing it. So then when a person's in that state, the heart in and of itself, when it's activated like that, gets super organized. It gets coherent, and it sends a signal to the brain, literally in the form of information, to tell the brain, the survival system, to shut down, that the amygdala, literally, the lights go out. It resets the baseline for the trauma in the brain, and the body moves out of survival. And now it wants to create. And the heart informs the brain to get creative. And the brain goes into these beautiful, organized alpha brainwave patterns. And in alpha, we tend to imagine, we tend to create, we tend to dream. So the heart informs the brain. It's time to create. That's, I think, when we're in that state of inspiration where we're actually falling in love with what we're creating. We're bonding to that creation. And the stronger the emotion we feel, the more we remember that future. And I think that's how people really begin to make those changes. Now, getting there is a daily practice. Getting there is something that you have to keep doing. So the block for us to feel love is that if we're living in survival, you have to make up your mind that state is not a state to create and break away from the people in your life and your schedule and your phone and all the obligations you have long enough to reset just for a little period of time and to remember.
Yeah.
So you don't forget. I think that's where it becomes super valuable.
What is your thoughts around the identity of money and the psychology of how it plays in our lives? Because a lot of people want to make more, they want to attract more, but they're just struggling with just the concept of it.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, I think we've been programmed quite a bit with our relationship with money. And we have a relationship with everything known in our environment. You have a relationship, a neurological network in your brain for your parents, for your cell phone, for your computer, where you live, where you've lived in the past, what you're going to do tomorrow. That for the most part, the brain is a reflection of everything that we know, right? So along with that is our relationship with money. And I feel like I have a really good relationship with money because I work on having a really good relationship with everything in my life.
Did you always have a good relationship with money?
I think so. I think so. I've never really lived in lack. That just wasn't part of it. Even when I went to college and I had to take out student loans and stuff, I always figured out a way to always be a little bit ahead of the curve. And so let's back up and just look at how people form beliefs, because most beliefs are created from past experiences, right? So children, when they're in their early ages, their brainwaves are very slow. Like their brainwaves are in alpha when they're like 7 to 12. They're in theta when they're like 2 to 6 years old, and they're in delta like when they're newborn to 2 years old. And so these brainwave states are states that were really suggestible to information.
So when we hear information, we believe it.
And we accept it, we believe it, we surrender to it as if it's the truth without analyzing it, because there's no analytical facilities yet.
Right.
The analytical mind starts around 12 or so, 7 to 12, and that analytical mind is actually what creates a barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind.
So before 12, roughly, what we see, how we model our parents' behavior, what they say to us.
It's all being programmed subconsciously, right? And so that's really, really important, because if you heard money is the root of all evil, money is bad, only certain people are allowed to make money, you have to work hard to make money, this is how you got to do it. And that becomes the foundation subconsciously. Recording an audio file. You just keep recording that audio file, it becomes a subconscious program, right? So a lot of people have a relationship with money based on either what they've been told or what they've experienced in their outer environment, right? So then we gain information from our environment, and the stronger the emotion we feel from experiences in our lives, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a picture. And that snapshot is called the memory. So
based on an emotion.
Based on an emotion. The emotion alters our internal state. So you're going along as Lewis, feeling really good, and all of a sudden you have this trauma, you have this crisis, you have this shock, and all of a sudden you have this dramatic change in your internal state, and your senses get heightened, and then you freeze the frame and you associate this internal state with whatever it is that's causing it, right? And that's how we create long-term memories, right? So
are painful memories more powerful, or beautiful memories more powerful?
They're both equal.
Okay.
They're both equal, but the problem is I think most people experience from more the negative emotions, right? And those negative emotions really are derived from the hormones of stress, right? So the alarm system, the emergency system, creates an arousal inwardly. And that arousal is saying there's something dangerous in your outer environment, right? And it could be a person, a circumstance, an accident, or whatever. And that change in emotional state causes you to remember the event. You got to pay attention, right? You got to stay really and narrow your focus on the cause. So think about people who have relationships with money, right, from the past. All beliefs are based on past experiences. So you have an experience where you lose money, you have an experience where money's taken away from you, you have an experience where you don't have enough, you're living in a place where there's not enough money, or a family that's not enough money. Then the emotion that most people are living by on a moment-to-moment basis is lack. Like, I'm in lack of having something that I want, okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because the experience changes your emotional state. You freeze the frame, you take a picture. The problem is, that's hardware. So we think neurologically within the circuits of that past experience, and we feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion, which would say, for example, be lack, right? So now the person says...
Before you go on to the next thing, what happens to the body and the mind when it is in an environment of lack? Mentally or physically, I'm in lack. What is the body and the mind saying?
Yeah, so the body is saying, I'm waiting for some external event to occur. I win the lottery. I marry the right guy. Whatever it is, that you're waiting for that event to occur. That experience produces an emotion. So the emotion then takes away the lack. And so when we play the game in three-dimensional reality, the creation game in three-dimensional reality, we experience separation from everyone or everything, because our senses fool us into the illusion, the hallucination of separation. I'm here and you're there. I'm here and the door is over there. So I'm aware that I'm here at one point of consciousness, and the door is over there, another point of consciousness. Okay, so in order for me to get from here to the door, I got to move my body and do something through space. I got to do something, and everything in this three-dimensional reality is going to take time and energy, right? So, okay, so then here's Lewis right here, and then he says, okay, I want this experience in my future, and your brain automatically predicts and projects how far in the future you think it's going to take.
Maybe it's a year, 5 years, 10 years.
30 years.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Because that's what it's going to take to pay off that house, right? So now, one point of consciousness, I'm here. The other point of consciousness is where I'm placing my dream. So I'm separate from that experience. So then how do I get to that experience? In three-dimensional reality, you got to get up and you got to do something. You got to go to work. You got to drive to work. It takes energy. You got to fill your car with gas. You got to eat food. You got to work. You know, all this stuff. You got to sleep. You got to recover if there's stress. And now people are, in a sense, waiting for the experience that's 10 years down the road or 30 years down the road to happen, to take away the lack of them not having it. And unfortunately, many times when the experience finally occurs, they can't enjoy it because they're too exhausted, right? So you play the game, you go to school, you study really hard, or you study on your own, you develop some skills, you make the right choices, you start saving money, you start learning from your mistakes. And then the game is, how many things can you accumulate? And that accumulation then you associate with being wealthy or being abundant or being successful, right? And some people get really good at it, right? You can get really good at that. But for the most part, though, when we create from three-dimensional reality, we're creating from lack and separation. In other words, you're driving down the road and you see someone driving a car that all of a sudden you realize that you don't have. The moment you become aware that that person has that car and you don't have it, you're in lack of having it, right? So what the brain naturally does is it naturally creates you driving that car. And you have an image of yourself driving that car and you start identifying, wow, that would be a greater experience for me to have. The problem is the distance between the thought of what you want and the experience of actually happening for most people is the concept called time. Right? Between cause and effect, right? So some people develop the ability to manage themselves and manage their life. They develop certain skills and they can pay for it and they can get it very quickly. The problem is when the novelty of that experience wears off, you know, the car, and they're no longer identifying with that, and the feeling of emptiness and lack comes back.
They need to find something else.
They got to go and find something else. And so there's this game that goes on where you never have enough, right? And that's the lack game, right? So then if you think about people having the things they want in their life, when they create from lack and separation, it's the experience in three-dimensional reality that produces the emotion. And the emotion is saying, let's feel and experience this thing that you've been in lack and separation from. And that emotion then takes away the lack or separation. But you've worked really hard to get it. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Is there another way to do it?
Yes.
Okay, so the person who's living in lack is waiting for their wealth to feel abundant. They're waiting for their success to feel empowered. They're waiting for their healing to feel gratitude. They're waiting for their new relationship to feel love. They're waiting for their mystical experience to feel awe. That's the Newtonian model of reality, of cause and effect. Waiting for that event to happen to take away this separation or lack. Nothing wrong with it. It's the way most people create. But what we've discovered is actually something else. The moment you feel gratitude, your healing begins. The moment you feel worthy and abundant, you're generating wealth. The moment you're empowered, you are moving towards your success. The moment you're in love with yourself and you're in love with life, you'll create an equal. The moment you are in awe of life, you're going to have a mystical experience. And so that's causing an effect, right? So then if you can teach people then how to create, instead of from lack or separation, but create from wholeness, and create from what we call the quantum field instead of three-dimensional reality.
What's the difference?
Okay, so the way first of all, it takes knowledge, okay? The quantum field is an invisible field of energy that exists beyond our senses. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it. It exists beyond our experience of three-dimensional reality.
Our mind's consciousness, or would this be in a different space?
Okay, let's look at that. So the answer to the question is, how much of your waking day do you put your attention on matter, on the material world, and how much of your waking day are you aware of energy and frequency? For most people, they're unaware of the quantum field. And if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. Right. Just like you have a nose, but if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. The moment you become aware of it, it exists. Well, the quantum field, you can study all kinds of science, and they'll tell you there is this invisible field of frequency and energy that exists beyond the senses that tend to connect everything physical and material. In fact, everything physical and material is connected to this field. Okay, so how do you get there, right? How do you get there?
How do you get there?
How do you get there? So we discovered that when you take all of your attention off your body and you are not paying attention to your emotions, your drives, your habits, if you could take all of your attention off of every element in your environment, your cell phone, your tablet, your computer, your car, your whatever it is, your bed, take your attention away from everything, every place that you live, where you sleep, where you work, and you're not thinking about time. You're not thinking about your schedule, where you need to be, or what happened yesterday. You can relax into the present moment. There tends to be a dramatic change in the way the brain functions when people do this properly. We call it getting beyond yourself, but in a sense, you're dissociating from your three-dimensional reality. Why? Because if you're thinking about anything in your three-dimensional reality, that's where your attention is and that's where your energy is, okay? So we kind of figured out this formula when people really become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. They're pretty much all of a sudden outside the constraints of the Newtonian world of got to do something to get an outcome. And if you can teach people how to linger there without a name, without a face, without a profession, without a family, without a culture, without a past, without a disease, you teach them how to be in this place we call the unknown, right? And you teach them that from that place, that invisible field, is where everything material comes from. And if they could create coherence in their brain, you need a strong signal in the brain. The more coherent the brain, the more stronger the signal.
What do you mean a strong signal?
Okay, let's see how I could say this. When most people, when we look at brains in real time, and we're looking at people's how their mind is working. When you're under stress, okay, stress is created by not being able to predict something that's going to happen in your life. the perception that something's going to get worse or you can't control something, right? So when that occurs, we switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and the brain goes into this very alarmed state called high beta. That means pay attention to the outer world. There's danger out there. But if it's not a predator and it's traffic or your coworker or your ex,
Right.
this is where it gets to be a problem because it becomes very maladaptive, right? So when we're in that state and the brain is in that aroused state, we try to control and predict everything. So every person, every object, everything, every place, even your body has a neurological network in your brain, right? So as the arousal happens, we start shifting our attention to all these elements. And like a lightning storm in the clouds, the brain starts firing very, very incoherently. And when the brain's incoherent, we're incoherent. It's just
that's not a strong signal.
That's not. It's a static on the wire. That's disconnection. There is no signal.
Right.
So when we're in that state, we're always really looking for the worst case scenario of what's going to happen. Because if you prepare for the worst, anything less happens, a better chance of survival, right? So in this kind of aroused state, as we shift our attention to each one of these elements that are known in our environment, the brain starts compartmentalizing and firing out of order. And that is what creates what's called autonomic dysregulation. That causes the brain and body to get really out of balance, right? So in that state, we're over-focused. You know, when you're stressed, you're over-focused on something. You can't stop thinking about it. Our research shows that when you do that, you actually make your brain worse because you're analyzing your problems within some disturbing emotion, and that emotion is driving you further out of balance. You're actually knocking your brain and body out of balance by thought alone, and you're driving it into these more aroused states, right?
For someone that's been living like that for decades, that's their base state. How do they even realize how to get out of that?
They don't. Usually it takes crisis, right? It takes trauma.
Extreme breakdown.
Yeah, breakdown.
A loss, a death,
all of
a
that.
breakup, a divorce, a near
bankruptcy, whatever it is, a disease, a diagnosis, whatever, something where you just can't go on business as usual. Now it's time to really start looking, right?
They have to wake up then.
Yeah. So let's get back to the concept of abundance here, because
you need a strong signal in this field.
Right. So then if you can teach people to do the exact opposite, go from putting all of their attention on everything physical and material in the world of separation, and instead of narrowing their focus on something material, ask them to broaden their focus and put it on nothing. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when you put your attention on space and you divert your attention, the act of sensing without thinking actually starts to slow the brainwaves down. Not only slow it down, but all of a sudden cause the brain to start reintegrating, starts to synchronize, right? And so you see different compartments of the brain that were firing out of order start to resonate. They start to communicate. They're all of a sudden synchronizing, and what syncs in the brain kind of links in the brain. So when a person has their whole entire brain firing in rhythm, that's a very strong signal that you can send out into the field.
So when that signal is strong in that position, what can you create from that space?
Okay, but that's only one element.
Okay.
So then the clear intention tends to be a very important element that we have to get down. And the more coherent the brain, the more clear the signal for that intention. So with intention and attention, we could actually make thought more real than anything else. Now, what is that? You're saying, what would it be like to be wealthy? What would it be like to be abundant? What would it be like to have all my needs met? What would it be like to have more than I need? What would I do if I had everything I ever wanted? The answer always is the same. You start giving stuff away. Because if an abundant person is truly abundant, why would they hold on? They would say, I'm not in lack. There's more for everybody, okay? Turns out, though, that the signal sent out isn't enough. You have to draw the experience back to you. And so
send the signal out to,
it's coherent brain,
financial freedom,
whatever
abundance, all these different things.
Right. Whatever that is for you. Whatever that is for you.
Putting that out there with your signal, with the intention and the attention.
Right.
And then how do you draw it to you? So in the physical world,
in the physical world, you got to go get it. You got to do something. This is the plane of demonstration. You got to go get it. And when you're in lack until it occurs, right?
But I'm hearing you say there's a way to not chase but attract.
All right. So if you're creating from the field instead of from matter, right? There's a very strong possibility that you'll shorten the distance between the thought of what you want and the experience of having it. And when there's a vibrational match between your energy and that future that you want to experience, now if you're creating from the field, you actually don't go anywhere to get it. You actually draw it to you. So here comes the synchronicities, the serendipities, the coincidences, the opportunities, and they come out of nowhere. And you say, I don't understand. I didn't do anything. Well, you changed your energy. And so then the other element is a coherent heart, right? And the heart has a magnetic signature. And the magnetic signature is what draws reality to us, right? So you combine that clear intention with a coherent brain. Now here's the key. This takes practice.
Yes.
Because the person who's living in lack is usually unworthy, is usually insecure, is usually in their past, they're usually frustrated, they're usually impatient, they're usually resentful, because nothing's changing out there because it's taking too long. Well, everything takes a lot of time when you do matter to matter, right? So then if you teach them, okay, we know all about that. We know the story behind that. We know what your parents told you about money, all that other, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But now let's do something that would be really cool. Let's write down the feelings of how you would feel if that future happened, and you're going to have to feel that feeling before it occurs. So now, okay, what does an abundant person feel? Pretty much free, a lot of freedom.
Peace, excited, joyful.
In love with life, grateful to be alive, abundant. Okay, now let's practice feeling those. Turns out when you're feeling those other emotions like resentment and impatience and frustration, you're stepping on the gas pedal, you're turning on the sympathetic nervous system, and you're stepping on the brake. At the same time, which is you're angry, you're frustrated, but the fight or flight nervous system says run, fight, or hide, and you're sitting in a Zoom meeting and your neck is pulsating is because the heart is beating against the closed system, right? You're not using it in an adaptive way. So the heart starts firing out of order. It starts firing incoherently, and incoherent waves cancel each other out. It's called destructive interference, and then we stop trusting our future. Energy leaves the heart. Energy leaves the brain, energy leaves the heart, and you can't get in touch with the feeling of your future because in survival, which those are hormones of stress, all those emotions, in survival, it's not a time to create, right? It's time to run, fight, and hide. Okay, so we gotta lay down the very thing we used our whole life to get what we want. The habit of doing it that way for something greater to occur.
I think you hit on a really important nerve there, this idea that we're living in a constant state of stress. And when I think about our community who are thinking about dating, and I think about friends in my life that are trying to find romantic love, especially in their life, and they're feeling around dating, mentally, physically, emotionally, is stressful. The idea of dating is stressful. The idea of being on a date is stressful. The idea of talking to someone is stressful. And it's so interesting, you're so right, that how are you going to create when all of your emotions around this is stress? You've got the stress of a timeline. Gosh, I'm in my mid-30s. I should have found someone by now, is things I hear. Oh, I'm in the stress of, I've been out on 7 dates in the last couple of months and none of them were good enough. And so I'm in the stress of scarcity. And so you're so right, that's what we're feeling. How do we get out of that system and that cycle? Because a lot of the time we've developed that feeling towards finding romantic love for like weeks, months, years.
Yeah.
How do you break that cycle?
There's nothing wrong with doing any of those things. But when we're stressed, we're altered. That stress is when we're out of balance. We're not ourselves, right? We can't relax and be authentic. And so typically, it usually takes a crisis or a disease or a diagnosis or a trauma or a loss or a betrayal for a person to really decide, is this really who I want to continue to be? So my message is, why wait for that, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to be in a relationship. I want the following things in a relationship from this person, or what might be my ideal relationship.
How detailed should you get on something like that? Like, should you be talking about physical things, or is it mainly emotional and connectedness? Like,
I think people have an image in their mind of what they like or what their type is or whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think what people are really looking for is connection and joy. Like, people should be in a relationship. The reason they should be in a relationship is to be overjoyed to be with the person that you're with, right? You want joy in your life. For me, it would make sense then if the person got very clear on what they wanted, then they should start on the journey to become that very person. They should really work on being that very person that they want. So there would have to be some change that they would have to make in order to be worthy enough to create a person that they would attract in their life. And we cannot attract anything in our life that we feel separate from. Trusting in a future that you can't see or experience, you have to lay down the very thing you use your whole life to get what you want, to trust that something greater could happen. And that's not something that's very easy. So I like the idea that it wouldn't happen on a date that was from an app. It could happen in a bank. It could happen at a seminar. It could happen in the grocery store, all in a way that you least expect, right? And I think that when we get to a point where we're so happy with ourselves, we're no longer looking because we feel like we already have it. I think that's the state where people attract an equal.
Getting to that place feels like a challenge for people because it feels like I'm doing this so that I can get someone. Yeah. Right? It's always like connected that way as a...
Well, we're conditioned that way. We're conditioned in a way to like, okay, I need something out there. I need the experience, the proof. I need the event to occur. And the end product of that event or experience is called an emotion. The emotion takes away the lack or separation from not having it. So we're waiting for the event to occur to take away the feeling of separation or lack. And actually, that's not the healthiest way to create. And actually, we should feel the emotion of the experience before it happens, so that if you're feeling the emotion of that future before it happens, truly feeling it, you wouldn't be looking for it. You would only be looking for it when you felt separate from it, right? So can you maintain that state? Because the only way you're going to believe in that future is you have to feel the emotion associated with it.
So good.
The moment you feel the lack and the separation, you're going to believe in the past. And there's a story that goes along with the past that has everything to do with it. Dating is hard, or finding a person, or whatever that is. The story that we tell ourselves that we actually accept, believe, and surrender to as if it's the truth, right? So that's exactly what programs the subconscious mind into a belief, right? So the default is so seamless to lose that vision or that belief in the future the moment we start feeling the emotions of lack or survival in the past, right? That's the moment we can't see that future any longer, because we would be looking at that future through the lens of the past, and we would doubt that future could actually exist. So it's really an interesting thing that I learned just in the last few years, because I interview hundreds of people backstage that have had a dramatic change in their health. I'm talking about significant chronic diseases where they have no blood values that are abnormal, have no scans that show any signs of the disease any longer. And I asked them, like, how did you do that? Like, what did you do? And some of them say, like, I was doing my meditation sometimes 3 times a day because the drugs weren't working, the chemo wasn't working, the drug trials weren't working, the surgeries weren't working, the radiation wasn't working, the diet wasn't working, nothing was working, right? And so the only thing that they were left with was the belief in themselves. And when you believe in yourself, you got to believe in possibility. And when you believe in possibility, you have to believe in yourself. So they were doing their meditations 3 times a day because they lost their belief that they could heal. They lost their belief. And so they were doing their meditation again to change their emotional state so that they could believe in that future again instead of believe in their past. if you keep doing that, it's that thought and that feeling, it's that image, that's emotion, that stimulus and response that's conditioning the body emotionally into the future. And that's really how you change the belief. So the people were doing the work to change their belief because they defaulted back to the self-doubt, and that of course is disbelief, and that's chronic, right? So then how many times do we have to do that until we stop doing that and start doing something else? I think that's when our reality begins to change. We have a lot of beliefs about things that we're not even conscious of.
And they're not been tested. We don't know if they're true.
We don't know if they're true. We've actually, in fact, made them up.
What happens when someone's been catfished? When they've been heartbroken? When they've been cheated on?
The stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. You're holding yourself hostage to the past.
What's the challenge when someone's lost their belief because they've had a heartbreak? Let's say, what happens when someone's been catfished, when they've been betrayed, when they've been heartbroken, when they've been cheated on, when they've been lied to, manipulated, gaslit? Like, they've had a moment that has made them lose belief because they've been hurt and broken so many times in love.
Yeah.
And now you're right, on a belief level, they don't believe they're lovable. They don't believe love exists for them. They don't believe good people exist, right? These are all beliefs. And so what do you do when you've actually gone through quite a, you could call it a traumatic, a toxic event or experience that someone's been through?
Yeah, I think everybody's had those. I think, once again, the stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. The brain actually freezes that frame, right? So the person thinks neurologically within the circuitry of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion. And how we think and how we feel becomes our state of being. So every time they remember the event, they're producing that same chemistry, as I said, over and over again, and you're conditioning the body into a belief, right? And the moment we draw a conclusion about that experience, that's the belief, right? That becomes the belief that we accept to, believe, and surrender to. So then beliefs are subconscious states of being, right? So And it tends to be 95% of who we are by the time we get to the middle of our life. So it's those subconscious beliefs that really run our life and run our reality. So it would make sense then to the person, unless I can heal from the experience and overcome the emotion, because the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, and you never have to do it again because you know now that you know. If that's the truth, then okay, I'll do this for a period of time, but this state is not loving to me. Living in this state is not loving to me. What's loving to me is that I actually overcome the emotion of the past. And when I overcome the emotion of the past, now the body's no longer believing in that any longer, right? So that theoretically is easier said than done. So the survival emotions tend to become very addictive. So the rush of just remembering the event is an arousal for the body, and people become very addicted to their beliefs, right? And so, but if you tell a person like, okay, your subconscious mind is going to keep replaying the same experience in your life unless you heal, okay, that could make sense to certain people. If you can't overcome that emotion, then you'll never be able to open your heart. So do you want love in your life or not? Okay, forgiveness then, and we've discovered this. Forgiveness is when you overcome the emotion of your past and you no longer have your attention on that person or that experience any longer, right? And so you feel so good that you no longer want to feel bad, right? And so you free yourself from that belief, and you free that person as well, or the experience. And literally that's energy that's liberated as information that the body can actually use to create with, right? So I think there's information and knowledge that just has to be given to people for them to understand, okay, justified or not, valid or not, the only person that this really is affecting is me. They went on with their life.
Yeah.
They started a new career. They're living in a new place. They're writing a book. They're on their way, and you're holding yourself hostage to the past, right? So then you got to trust that love is available, or love is real. In order for you to create someone in your life that is loving, you would have to be worthy of love, and that means you would have to feel love too. So I think people make their way out of this all the time, and we deal with severe PTSD, with veterans, and there's some pretty brutal memories there, and there's a lot of trauma that's stored in the body as well, and they deal with a lot of difficulties. And when you tell them it's the heart that resets the baseline for the trauma in the brain, all you have to do is have the courage to open that thing again. And they may come up against themselves for a few days, but once it happens, and they understand the process, their past is wisdom. They don't have to ever go back there again, right? They understand it all, but there's no charge associated with it any longer. And that's when we belong to the future, right? That's when the synchronicities and the coincidences and the miracles and the opportunities begin to show up in our life that prove to us that we are the creators of our life.
So is the issue that people, when they want change, they don't change deeply enough? They're just looking at, well, if I do this particular new physical habit, that will be able to change things, but the underlying currents that are driving that behavior are always going to come in and then take over, despite the fact that you don't want to eat sugar anymore, or you want to be more polite with your partner, or you want to be more... It's too surface level with a lot of the change that tries to be attempted.
Yeah, I think that people, unfortunately, have to get knocked to our lowest level sometimes, where you're no longer inside the jar. When you're inside the jar, you can't read the label. You got to get so uncomfortable that you could actually see yourself, right? And so that tragedy, that crisis, that disease, the diagnosis, the loss, it's got to be so severe that you finally look at yourself and say, maybe it's me. Oh my God, could it possibly be me? But you're looking at yourself kind of through the eyes of someone else because you don't feel like you in that moment. You're so uncomfortable that you can see yourself. That concept is called metacognition, right? So a lot of times people wait for that crisis or the diagnosis or the betrayal to go, oh my God, I got to really change because I'm really unhappy, or I can't blame that person or my past or my circumstance because and nothing's working here. I got to really start making those changes. So when they see themselves separate from their program, they're becoming conscious of their unconscious self. That is the first step to change. Now, I say you can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, which most people like to do, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration, right? So could you be defined by a vision of the future? And could you get up from your morning practice actually believing in your future more than you're believing in your past? So from that elevated state where you combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion, from an elevated state, instead of a self-limiting state, you can be conscious of that old self as well. And so I think, God, what a great time in history to be alive, because this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is really a time in history to know how. And I've been at this long enough, Chris, to know that 20 years ago, people didn't hear it like they hear it now. The information is readily available, and people are realizing, kind of, if I have this dream, if I have this goal, how bad do I want it? And if they really want it, and we've all done this, you sit down and you say, what would it be like to be super healthy, super wealthy, super in love, super mystical, transcendental, whatever it is? Like, you ask that question and your brain gets really creative. It starts combining circuits in new ways, and you start getting this vision of the future, this possibility that you actually put yourself in this future reality. It becomes so real that you start to feel the emotion as if you were actually there. And so that moment when you come out of your resting state, the stronger the emotion you feel when you hold that vision, the more you'll remember that vision. That's creating a memory. So the person comes out of their resting state and they make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that causes their body to respond to their mind. That their choice that they're making in that moment becomes a moment in time that they would never forget. They'll say to you, I remember the moment I made up my mind to change. I was in this place. I was with these people. I was this particular time. That the event is a long-term memory. And they've come out of the resting state. And we could say then they're giving their body a taste of the future emotionally, and somehow they begin to embody whatever that future is, and now they begin to move in a different direction. And so they start trusting in their future more because they feel like they're connected to it. So then the person who's really interested in making a change would have to come to that same state again in order to produce the same effect. If they say, I don't feel like it, or I want to be nicer, or whatever, and there's nothing really at stake. Intention is really meaning. You got to have a meaning behind what you're doing. So people who now say, I want a better life, I can't have a better life unless I change. And when I change, my life will change. Now you're not so interested in what's happening out there. You're more interested in what's going on inside of you.
To go from any state that we're in now to a new state, that transformation process requires stepping from known to unknown.
Yeah.
How can people get more comfortable with stepping into the unknown, and why is it such a scary place?
Let's see if I can explain this on two levels. The brain is a record of the past. The brain is a reflection of everything in your environment that's known to you. It's an artifact. It's a repository of everything you've learned and experienced in your life. It's a memory bank. And so people wake up in the morning and every person, every object, everything, every place, every experience that they've had in their life is mapped neurologically in their brain. So they wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is they think about those problems. And those problems are memories that are really tattooed in the recesses of their gray matter. And the moment they start remembering the problem, they start remembering the past, they're thinking in the past. Every one of those experiences or problems has an emotion associated to them. So the moment they think of the past and they start feeling unhappy or anxious, now their body's in the past. Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. Thought and feeling, an image and an emotion, a stimulus and response, and you're conditioning the body emotionally into the familiar past. And the body's so objective, as I said, doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the one that you're imagining. The body's actually believing it's living in the environment where that problem is actually existing in the present moment. So that becomes the familiar past, and we call that the known. Then people get up and then they rush through a series of automatic routine behaviors. They're on automatic pilot because they do the same thing today as they did yesterday. And a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. So now the person is in habituation, a program, and their body's dragging them into the same predictable future based on what they did in their past. In other words, we could take up their yesterday and set it on their tomorrow, and there's going to be a lot of predictability. So if you can predict something, then that's the known too. So the familiar past is the known, the predictable future is the known. There's only one place left where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And so we teach people how to master the moment, how to master their attention. And where you place your attention is where you place your energy. And paying attention is being present. And you know when someone's paying attention to you because they're present with you. And you know when they're present with you because they're paying attention to you. Well, it's the exact same thing. So you're sitting with your eyes closed and you start thinking, how long is this going to go? I got a lot of things to do. Oh, God, I got to think about that place I got to go to and meet that person. I got another meeting over there. And now your brain is actually defaulting and going to that predictable future. We discovered that you're not a bad meditator actually at all. This is actually how you do meditate. You become conscious that you've gone unconscious in your predictable future and you return your attention back to the present moment. That's a victory. Okay, so then your body says, hey, it's been about an hour. You usually get pretty judgmental around this time. You get in traffic, you get really angry, and you're sitting in a meditation, and all of a sudden you start feeling aroused and impatient and frustrated. And most people think, oh, well, that means I can't meditate. Well, actually, your body's used to being stimulated from something outside of itself. You settle the body back down into the present moment and you tell it it's no longer the mind, you're the mind. Do this enough times and train the body to be in the present moment, to be in the unknown. There'll come a moment where the body is no longer the mind. The servant's no longer the master, you're the mind. And when that occurs, there's this tremendous liberation of energy that takes place in the body. The body's going from particle to wave. It's going from matter to energy. The body's being freed from the chains of the past or the predictable future. And we discover energy actually kind of moves right into a person's heart. And they start feeling really grateful to be in the present moment instead of being in the unknown and trying to predict the next moment. So it's a practice, and if you practice it on a regular basis, we discovered you can get really good at being in the unknown and going against thousands of years of programming that says the unknown is a dangerous and a scary place. There's better chances of survival if you run from the unknown than you embrace it. So you put the person they keep relaxing into the unknown, and sooner or later they realize nothing bad is happening in the unknown, and they just start relaxing and expanding. And there's just a host of biological changes that begin to take place. So I think you can make that a skill or a habit. When you're living in stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. And it's a scientific fact that the long-term effects of the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease, which means your thoughts could literally make you sick.
How do people become addicted to their own thoughts? It seems like there is this degree of familiarity with what we're used to here, but there would be a question, if these thoughts are negative, if they're negative emotions, if they're tormenting me, if they're making me feel bad, why would I continue to just be my own torturer 24 hours a day?
Well, an addiction is something that you think you can't stop. An addiction is when you know something is not good for you, and you tend to choose and do it anyway, right? So turns out that living in stress is living in survival. And when you perceive a threat or a danger, or you perceive something that's potentially going to get worse in your life, or you can't control or predict something in your life, you switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and it's secreting a lot of chemicals to get you awake. It's getting you ready. It's wanting you to perform. But if there's too much, the rush of that adrenaline is like a surge of energy. It's an arousal, and people get addicted to that rush of energy. So they use the problems, they use the conditions, the stories of the past in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. So they need the bad job, they need the bad relationship, they need the challenging conditions in their life because it makes them feel something, right? So, okay, so when you're living in stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. So the moment you react to someone or something in your life and you switch on that system of arousal, and it's an emergency system, your body moves completely out of balance. It's mobilizing all of its energy for some threat, real or imagined, okay? The problem with human beings is for a zebra or for a gazelle, if it outruns the lion, it goes back to grazing. The event is over and the stress is short term. But if it's a constant exposure to stressors in your life, what once was adaptive becomes very maladaptive. Because when you turn on that stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease because your body's constantly out of homeostasis and balance. So the event is over and someone betrayed you, or you lost your job, or you got fired, and you can't stop thinking about it. So every time you think about that problem, you're turning on the stress response just by thought alone. So if the hormones of stress are addictive, and you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, you could become addicted to your own thoughts. And if you have to keep talking about those problems to get the rush of adrenaline, your thoughts can knock you out of balance as well. And it's a scientific fact that the long-term effects of the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease, which means your thoughts could literally make you sick. So then if your thoughts could make you sick, the fundamental question is, can your thoughts make you well? And that's what we're, interested in uncovering.
Talk to me about stepping into that loop, that addictive loop of the negative thoughts.
So every time you have a thought, you make a chemical. And if you have a happy thought or think of something happy, you turn on a set of neurological networks in your brain that fire in a sequence, a pattern, a combination that signals another part of the brain. The brain makes another chemical that's a chemical messenger that makes you feel a certain way as you secrete a certain hormone. Okay, the moment you start to feel happy, the moment you start to feel joyful, your brain is checking in with your body saying, Chris, you're feeling pretty joyful. And so then the chemistry influences you to think more wonderful thoughts. And so the cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking creates what we call a state of being, okay? But you could have thoughts that make you feel guilty, and you can turn on a different set of circuits in your brain that signal a different batch of neuropeptides, that signal a different hormonal center to make you feel differently. The moment you feel miserable, the moment you feel victimized, the moment you feel suffering, the moment you feel pain, and you can't think greater than how you feel, the brain's checking in with the body and saying you're really miserable, and it generates more corresponding thoughts equal to that feeling. So it's thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking. This loop of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking creates a state of being. And again, the thought and the feeling, the image and the emotion, the stimulus and response is making the body become conditioned subconsciously into the past. And so now the person has to feel that same emotion to reaffirm their identity. So that becomes their state of being. And now they behave as if they're in their past, and they think as if they're in their past. So I believe that all beliefs are created from past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again.
Yes.
Until you hardwired in your brain. And a hardwired set of circuits is an automatic unconscious program. So we have a lot of beliefs about things that we're not even conscious of.
And they're not been tested. We don't know if they're true.
We don't know if they're true. We've actually, in fact, made them up.
Yeah.
And this happens quite a bit in the work that we do. People see the testimonials, they see the science, they see the data, and they say, oh my God, I actually believe that this stuff works. And they're facing a chronic health condition or a serious health condition. And they come to the realization that they just became conscious that they didn't believe it would work for them. It would work. It looks like it works, but I never thought it could work for me. Now, this is a big moment, because this is the moment where you're stepping out of the bleachers onto the playing field, right? This is now where you got to show up for yourself, right? The person, when they sit down and they decide to make a different choice, and this is the hardest part about change. The moment you decide to make a different choice, you're going to feel uncomfortable.
Very, yeah.
You're going to leave the familiar known, right? And the body, which has been conditioned into the past, into the known, which has been conditioned to be the mind. The servant's the master, and it's going to try to talk you out of that future that is unfamiliar, or unknown, or unpredictable. And so that's the moment where the beliefs start coming up. You're not good enough. This is too hard. You'll never change. You can't create anything. It's this person's fault. There's something wrong with me. I want to quit. And then people say like, oh, well, I have ADD, I can't focus my mind. And it turns out they say, I'm not a good meditator, or I can't control my mind, and meditation's not for me. But really, I'm doing it wrong, they'll say. But in fact, they're actually doing it right. Because sitting with yourself and becoming conscious of all of those unconscious thoughts means now you're no longer the program. You're only the program when you're unconscious to that belief. The moment you become conscious of that unconscious belief, the greater the probability that you won't go unconscious to it again. And that's how you become more conscious, is catching yourself going unconscious, and it becomes a skill. the more you practice it, the better you get at going like, I'm just not going to believe that any longer. And nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. So as you attend to that thought and notice it and observe it without actually believing it, it weakens the connections neurologically in the brain. And there's a neurological death or a separation that's taking place. Okay, so the person then who blames and complains and makes excuses and feels sorry for themselves and behaves a certain way, well, those are habits, right? And those are unconscious programmed behaviors. The only way you're going to change is to become conscious that you complain all day long or you blame somebody for your life. A happy person would never want to be that, want to behave that way, and would never want to be in a relationship with a person who complains all the time. Why would you, right? So then that person says, okay, how many times do I have to forget until I stop forgetting and start remembering? That is my moment of change. So today, I'm going to behave in a different way and make a different choice. I'm going to just stay conscious to not do these things. Okay, and then the person says, well, I feel unworthy, I feel stressed, I feel unhappy, I feel sad, I feel victimized, I feel grief, whatever. Is this the emotion that I want to have in my future? Well, no, these are emotions that are connected to experiences of the past. If I truly want love in my life, I can't feel resentment. Okay, am I willing to trade resentment for this elevated emotion? Okay, let me just remember all the times in my day, if I start noticing I feeling this emotion, I'm just going to become conscious and not go unconscious to it and just temper it and work with it. Okay, so that is that overcoming process. That is the becoming process. Now, it would make sense then, you would have to ask yourself, what do I want to believe? What is a thought that I do want to fire and wire in my brain? So with intention and with attention, if you had the person remember what they wanted to believe and keep remembering what they want to believe and keep remembering what they want to believe, they begin to install the hardware. If you keep attending to it, the hardware becomes like a software program, and now that's the new belief. I can heal. I can find the relationship. And belief is like pregnancy. Either you are or you're not. I mean, there's no in between. So you want to install the circuitry to such a degree that that's the new voice in your head. That's saying, come on, Jay, get up. Come on, Jay, let's go. Come on, you can do this. Come on, make the time for it. Come on, this is your vision. Come on.
It's a coach in your own head.
It's a voice.
Yeah, voice.
The voice is no longer the disbelief. The voice is basically your future self talking to you is what it is. It's your future. All right, so, okay, so if I start behaving in the old way, I know I'm gonna disbelieve. So how do I want to behave? How am I going to behave on my next date? How am I going to behave on my next Zoom meeting with my team? How am I going to behave with my children or in my family or with my partner, with my ex? How do I want to be? And the act of rehearsing mentally in your mind who you want to be, the act of just closing your eyes and mentally rehearsing that scene literally causes the brain to look like you already did it. It looks like it's already happened, right? So now you're priming the brain neurologically. Keep doing it over and over again. The hardware becomes more automatic, like a software program. You naturally get your behaviors to match your intentions, and because you installed the circuitry. Practice feeling the elevated emotion. If you feel that emotion and you say, when I feel this emotion, I can believe in that future, then let me just keep remembering to feel this way in every part of my day. And this is not about positive thinking. This is about conditioning my body emotionally into the future. So I got to keep my energy up the entire day, and I can't default back to the old person. As long as I'm feeling this emotion, I'm going to behave that way. As long as I'm feeling this emotion, I'm going to believe in that future. If I maintain this modified state of mind and body my entire day as an experiment, should there be some evidence in my life as a result of my change in state of being, a synchronicity, a coincidence? And if there is, then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to actually do it again. And I think that's how we start stepping into that future.